I thought I would start off this message in a little bit of a different way. Let's see how these 30-year-old lungs will do. I still got it. You know, I was thinking about how we go through our week. Start our week hopefully with some energy, jumping back in after Sunday, and you're excited, and you're saying, hey, I'm ready to tackle this week. And then you deal with all your email inbox that's overflowing. What happens? A little bit goes out. Tuesday comes around, you're saying, hey, I know, it's good, I'm glad I'm here, but you just deal with the worst customers that you've ever dealt with. They're just complaining, they're not happy, and a little bit more goes out. Wednesday comes around, you think, hey, this is hump day, we're gonna work through it, we're gonna get through this, and what happens? You have a bad conversation with your boss. A little bit more goes out. Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and what I found is that the week goes by, and then you end up with very little left. And that was just 1 week. Then you start the next week like this. Now the bad customers are on Monday. The Nexonia reports are on Tuesday. You're filling things in slowly but surely, and what we end up really doing is trying to navigate life feeling, tell me if you've ever felt this, deflated. Like you feel like you don't have the energy, you don't have the passion, you don't have what you need to get through this week. And we try to navigate week by week, month by month, trying to, take life for all that it is, but you're deflated. Anyone feel like this? Ever felt deflated? I remember during the pandemic feeling deflated and feeling like I'm working hard and I'm doing the right things, but I am so tired. And I'll tell you what, when you're deflated, you're not your best. When you're deflated, you're not the best you can be at work. When you're deflated in your relationship, your relationship is not gonna be where you want it to be because you're deflated. You don't have the energy, the passion. When you feel deflated spiritually, you're not worshiping with both your hands and really passionate because why? You feel like you're almost on empty. You don't have very much left. 50% of employees in America, 53% of managers feel burned out at work. Burnout and stress, according to the American Psychological Association, is at all-time highs across all professions. And yet this is how a lot of us are functioning in our lives. And so going through this, I started to ask myself, God, I don't want to feel like this. I don't want to live like this. I don't want to be a parent that's deflated, a husband that's deflated, a worker that's deflated. God, there has to be a better way. There's got to be some mechanism, some pattern, something that we can do and apply to our life to be able to have that refill that we need. Can I tell you what that is? God does have an answer for us. God has a mechanism that he created back in the order of creation called the Sabbath. So that when we deal with the deflating reality that happens with life, that once a week, God says, you're gonna be once again refilled with all that you need to be and live the life that I've called you to live. I wanna turn you to Exodus. And in Exodus, by the way, we said for the last few weeks, it was the last week. Just kidding. Full. I feel overflowing. I don't feel like I'm deflated. Join me in Exodus chapter 31. Just a few verses here. where the Lord is going to teach us about the refill that happens weekly called Sabbath. And I have a few points here that I want to teach this morning from this passage, but we're going to start in Exodus chapter 31, verse 12. God is speaking to Moses and says this: "Then the Lord said to Moses, say to the Israelites, you must observe my Sabbaths. This will be a sign between me and you for generations to come, so you may know that I am the Lord who makes you holy." If you're feeling that way this morning and you want to be able to have that energy to take life, I want you to write down these ideas this morning. Number one, write this down. We need to understand the purpose. This message will be one good thing that goes in the ear and out the other if we don't understand the purpose. If we don't squeeze out the purpose and truly understand the benefit, then we'll walk out of here hearing this but not applying it. And let me tell you, I know it's quoted often, the truth will set you free, but the preceding verse is talking about obedience. So knowledge that's not applied is not powerful. Knowledge that's applied is powerful. Truth that you hear, that's great, but it just sitting in your brain doesn't set you free. Truth that you then take and say, I want to apply this to my life. I want to live this out. I want to try this and see if it's true. That changes lives. And so the context here as we start in Exodus, if you haven't been here the last few weeks, is God has freed these people using a man named Moses, the Israelite people, from slavery in Egypt for over 400 years. And they're now in this in-between place from the promised land, the place that God is taking them. They're in this in-between season of traveling in the desert, and God is leading them, and more importantly, teaching them the new way that they're supposed to live. They've only ever known living in slavery in Egypt. They've only ever known working brutally hard by masters, Egyptian masters, that gave them unfair working conditions and challenging situations. So all they've ever known is just the wrong way to do things. And now God's saying, hey, listen, I want to teach you a better way. A way that's going to make you feel full and life and refilled in a balance and with a flow. And so Moses has now been, as they're traveling through, Moses has now been on this mountain talking with God for 40 days and 40 nights. These are the final words that God is speaking to him before he comes back down to share with the people this better way that God is calling them to live. And Sabbath, to be clear and to define it this afternoon, is a day, one day out of the week, where you cease and stop all the work that you're doing. God said, this is the pattern that I want us to live to have a better life. And I want to share a few purposes that I believe are captured within this idea of Sabbath as we practice it. One of them is this, that one of the purposes is that the Sabbath is meant to bring us rest and refreshment. Isn't that a good thing? When you're tired, God has created, he loves you so much that he doesn't say, just work 7 days out of the week. God loves you so much that he says, I want you to take one day where you don't do any work, you cease, so that you can be the best version of yourself, because you're not infinite like I am. You need to be refilled. You need to have rest. You need to have a time of ceasing your work so that you can be refilled to be the best version of yourself that you are. And here's the beauty. God designed us so he knows what's best for us. God's not like, maybe this will work. God's not saying, try out this theory. God's saying, I wired you this way. You push energy out, you work hard, but then, my children, you need to be refilled and replenished. I think this is a beautiful thing to know that, man, we can rest. The other area here is he wants us to trust him, to trust. We see this in Exodus chapter 16, When God is providing for them in this desert period, they're saying, God, we need food, and God sends down bread from heaven called manna. And listen to chapter 16, what God says to the people. He says, I will rain down bread from heaven for you. The people are to go out each day and gather enough for that day. In this way, don't miss this, in this way, I will test them and see whether they follow my instructions. This is a trust thing. God said, I told you already the way you're supposed to live, but do you believe me that I'm gonna take care of you? Do you trust me? And then I love what he says next. He says this spiritual principle here. On the sixth day, they are to prepare what they bring in, and that is to be twice as much as they gather on the other days. Can I tell you this? When you're with God, what it takes other people 7 days to do, when you're with God, you can do it in 6. Other people they're working that 7th day, trying to get that promotion, trying to put that extra bit in. But you know what? When you trust in God and you say, God, I am going to cease working, even though I could, and there's other things I have to do, I am going to stop working because I trust you, God. And what he tells us is that even if we just work 6, he'll make sure that he provides for that day that we don't work. Isn't that a beautiful thing? That's a beautiful truth there. By the way, one of the things here that I think is significant to a great illustration here is, I mentioned probably too much, but Chick-fil-A. I just get hungry around this time. That's what it is. I get hungry, I mess all you guys up, getting you excited, and then it's closed. But the founder of Chick-fil-A, his name was Truett Cathy. And Truett Cathy was a devout believer, follower of Jesus. And so from the very beginning, him and his brother decided, we are not going to work on Sunday. Do you know Sunday is one of the busiest days that restaurants have open? It's the day everyone goes out and eat afterward. And they said, hey, we're not gonna work on this day because we are going to make sure that us and our employees can go to church. Listen to it from his own words. Truett said in his book, this is so good. We were not so committed to financial success, however, that we were willing to abandon our principles and priorities. One of the most visible examples of this was our decision to close on Sundays. Cathy described and said the decision to close on Sundays was a way of honoring God and, this is so good, directing our attention to things more important than our business. You say, yeah, pastor, but man, if I work 7 days, I can make more than a person that makes in 6. Do you know Chick-fil-A that doesn't work on one of the busiest days on Sunday? Chick-fil-A makes more per restaurant than McDonald's, Starbucks, and Subway combined. Their mission statement is to glorify God. I mean, this is a Christian company run on Christian principles that chooses not to work on the busiest day of the week, and they trust God, and God goes, watch what I do. You cannot compare with how they can work on 7, and I can make you outproduce them as they're working on 7. You can't compete with God. And if God can do it with a company that's focused on business, godly living, running a company in a godly way, don't tell me that he can't do it with our life. You say, God, I'm not gonna be able to get that promotion if I don't work 7. My boss wants me to work. You just focus on honoring God and working as hard as you can on those extra days and watch how God multiplies the effort of the work, because what God is working through is he's working through your faith and your trust in him to say, God, I know that you will provide if I put my faith and trust in you. And the final purpose that we see here is we see that it's to know, that one of the purposes of Sabbath is know, and the scripture clearly tells us here in chapter 31, so you may know that I am the Lord. Can I just backtrack one or two steps and say this? We should be so thankful and celebrating the fact that God doesn't say, you have to work 7 days a week. I used to feel guilty when I wouldn't work 7 days out of the week. I'm just being honest. I used to feel like I was being lazy if I didn't work 7 days out of the week. Like, oh man, I have a different drive. I can do this, and I would feel guilty, like I'm off, and I'd feel guilty, like I have more things to get done. And to know that God says, hey, Josiah, you don't have to feel guilty when you take off. You can take off. And I want to speak to some of the people, and this is not everybody, but I want to speak to some of the people. You may be a workaholic or an overworker. Let me just say this. Well, some of the most important things you're going to hear in this message is that God says that it is actually healthy to take off and have rest. And sometimes that drive that we have, drive is a great thing, but sometimes that drive that we have that pushes us to extremes is rooted in something that's unhealthy in our identity. You're trying to prove somebody wrong or let the world know that you're somebody of substance or significance, so you drive yourself to extremes, but really at the root of, and people see this and that and they think your life's great, but really what's driving it in you is there's something that's not being filled that you think can be filled with money. Listen to a podcast this week of the CEO of Airbnb. He said, when we went public to $100 billion, he said, I'll tell you what, I didn't feel that different when the company was worth $100 billion. He said, you know what the other thing is? He said, I realized at that level that money was never gonna fill me. So that's my word to our overworkers, recovering workaholics in the room. But let me say one more thing, one more side note to the rest of us in the room. There's some of us that overwork, but let me be clear about one of the things that he says here. Clearly in this passage, he says that we should work. Not as many amens for that one. I don't like that, Pastor. We'll come back to that. You guys need to sit on that one for a bit. We'll come back. All right. So knowing this purpose, he says clearly in this passage that one of the reasons for the Sabbath is to know God, clearly. And this is important because when you're building a relationship with somebody, you need time to get to know them. When I was getting to know my now wife, Carolina, I know, I'm a fan too, amen. Mm-hmm. When we started that relationship, I don't really know her. I don't know her character that much. I don't know her friends. I don't know how she values her faith. And so we went on dates. First date was in Oak Lawn. We went to Andy's Ice Cream there on Oak Lawn. Didn't know that she was lactose intolerant, but hey, you live and you learn. But as we were going through this, date after date that I took her on, I was investing time because this was a relationship that I thought may have some value. And the more time that I invested, the more that I got to know her and be like, this is somebody that I want to give my life to. Here's what God's saying here to us. He's saying, I am so serious about my relationship with you, and I know how busy life is, that I am asking you to cut one day out of the week where you cease from all the busyness of everything else that you do so that me and you can build a relationship. So I'm cutting out the time weekly for you to get to know me. God's like, I know you already. I know you, I know your story, I know your motives, I know even what tomorrow is gonna bring for you. But you need to know me, and I know how busy you are, so I'm gonna carve out time in your life every single week that you set aside and you have a more intentional, strong, serious focus to get to know my heart, to get to know me, to get to know how I'm wired, to get to know my commands. And what this produces, when we know, then we can obey and we can live holy. And that's what it says. We know him who makes you holy. How can you live? Holy means different, distinct, set apart. How can we live holy if we don't know the one who's holy? How can we live holy and different from the world if we don't even know what that looks like? And so God is saying, hey, listen, I'm setting this not just for your rest and refreshment, that's part of it. Not just so that you can trust me, that's part of it. But part of the reason I've set one day aside is because I want our relationship to be so strong that one day out of the week, you have to commit to just knowing me. He is a relational God all the way back in Exodus. He's painting a picture for us to live our life. He wants us to know him. 1 Peter's no different. He says, but as he who called you holy, as he who called you is holy, you also be holy in all of your conduct. Number two, listen to this. It's not just understanding and knowing the purpose, but number two, it's resetting your priorities. Listen to verse 14. God says to Moses, observe the Sabbath because it is holy to you. Anyone who desecrates it is to be put to death. Those who do any work on that day must be cut off from the people. For 6 days, work is to be done, but the seventh day is a day of Sabbath rest, holy to the Lord. It's set apart to the Lord. You're giving God this day every single week. Whoever does any work on the Sabbath day is to be put to death. God has some real high standards for this Sabbath thing. He's not just saying, try it, do it if you want, if you have busyness, if you're not working as hard. He says, no, this is something you need to do every single week. And if people aren't serious about it, that God actually instituted consequences. There wasn't consequences for everything that God said, but this one were severe consequences. And so the Israelites weren't supposed to work on that seventh day. And once again, it's the beauty of knowing God has given us place to rest, that it's healthy to rest. It's healthy to take time off from our goals and our ambitions and what we're trying to accomplish. But once again, now that we've had some time to let it really seep into our soul, let me just say this. But he says 6 days for work. Only one. What I'm saying is this. As I spoke to the other half of the extreme, let me speak to the other half of the extreme. God has called you to work. And sometimes we have a misunderstanding of the story in Genesis, and we think that work is a curse. Can I tell you, that is not the curse. Adam and Eve had work from God before they ever fell in sin. The curse was that work would be more difficult for them to do, but it wasn't work. Ecclesiastes tells us that work isn't a curse, but it's actually a blessing. That actually, when you're doing work that you enjoy, when you're working hard, when you're making a difference in the area, when you're providing a service, that's actually one of the things that can fill us up and give us joy and purpose. You know, they did a study in New York that men that were retired at 65 years old, secular study, 65 years old, within 2 years of their retirement, 50% of them died. That's pretty shocking. And it's to say that, not that retirement's a bad thing, what it's to say is that work is a thing that actually gives us purpose and direction. To get up and know I have something to do, something to build, some type of difference to make, this to pour my time into, and you get to use your giftings and abilities, God says that's actually a gift. And so I know, and I'll put a disclaimer out there, I know that many of you in this room work in very, very difficult work environments as well. You have bosses that don't treat you right. You have people that push you to the absolute extremes, coworkers that gossip about you. And so I understand the broken world that we live in, that even though work has so much purpose, it can ultimately and also be very toxic sometimes. And we're called to live out our faith in that. But let me say this. Regardless of how toxic your boss may be, or how difficult the work may be, as a Christian, if you're a Christian in the room, your boss is not your boss. Jesus is your ultimate boss. Well, I don't like my boss. I don't like the company I work for. Great, quit. There's 70 people for every 100 jobs out right now. Quit. Find another job. But if you're going to be there, you better be the hardest working person there is. You know why? Because you yourself have said, I'm following Jesus. When you follow Jesus, God says, whatever you do, work as until the Lord. And so it doesn't matter if I don't like my work conditions, my boss. Hey, talk to HR, make different. I'm not saying live in that forever, but you better work your butt off, regardless of what your coworkers are doing, because you are working for Jesus. Whether you work on a CTA bus, you work for Jesus. Whether you work in a CPS school, you work for Jesus. Whether you're a garbage person that's throwing garbage bags in the back of a truck, you better be the best garbage person, thrower, whatever, in the whole world, man. I love it. I love it. It's fun. Like, I don't like this message, Pastor. These things are so important to talk about because so much of our life we put into our work. Such a big percentage of our life we put into our work. And what he's telling us here, as we talk about resetting your priorities, to this passage, what he's talking about when we're working these 6 days and taking off this one day, why it's such a big deal to God. I look at these verses and I think, God, people are being put to death because they're not resting. People are being cut off from the people because they're not resting. It seems extreme, God. It seems like too much. And yet I know your heart. I know you're good. I know you're compassionate. I know you're loving. And I know you're also a ferocious fire, but it seems like too much. But here's why. We have to connect it with the purpose from before. Listen to what he's saying. God tells us to stop our regular work and spend a day worshiping him. This was a big deal to God because someone that chose to work on day 7, here's what they were saying to God. God, I'm working my business, my land, my this. This is more important than you. A person that went and worked that final day because the purpose of the Sabbath was to rest and trust and know God. For someone to say, I'm gonna work this day and not spend it focusing on God and growing in God, they were saying, God, I don't have the time for you. Think about if you were in a relationship with somebody else, you're getting to know them, you're dating them, and they say, hey, that was a great date that we went on. I'm so glad we got to connect at Starbucks. And you say, hey, well, when are we gonna get together again? And they say, I think in 3 months I have time for you. You better drop them. You better drop them. If they can't see you again for 3 months and they're in the same city, can I tell you, they're not that interested. Because where you put your time is where you say, that's the most valuable thing in my life. You ever talk to somebody, they say, hey, you're gonna come over to my house and we're gonna have a game night or we're gonna go eat some pizza. They say, hey, I'll be there. And then they're not there. I just had some things come up and you're like, what things? And then you see them later on Instagram and they chose to go somewhere else. What does that tell you about that friend? They may like you, but you and your situation, your house, that was not more important to them than their other option. And God is saying, my people, I'm leading you a better way. And if you're unwilling to put one day, you can work 6, but if you're unwilling to put one day aside to pursue me and get to know me, you are telling me to my face that my work or my sports are more important. You didn't like that one. My work or my sport is more important than you, God. Because just as people say, put your money where your mouth is, people put their time where their treasure is. You value it, you will cut time out of your schedule to make it happen. But if you don't, you'll find something else to fill that pocket of time. And I want to speak to the parents in the room a little bit. Amen. You know, when I was being raised, I played soccer a lot. I loved playing soccer. And my parents, I got offered to go into a traveling team. And I really enjoyed soccer. I liked it. I was pretty good. And my parents talked with me about it and said, hey, Josiah, we talked with them. They want to recruit you, but here's the thing. The games and all the practices and everything is on Sunday. And we prioritize our relationship and our walk and the gathering of believers. And so even though there's an opportunity here for you, we want to lead you in a way to show you what matters most. And so in my home, even though there was options to be had, my parents taught me by their faith and through their example, Josiah, there's a lot of things in your life you can choose, but there's some things that we don't play around with. God is the priority over these other things, and spending time with God and growing in God, we want to show you that example. You may miss out on some stuff, but you're not going to miss out on anything compared to what you get from walking with God. Parents in the room. Sometimes, and I'm saying this out of complete love, but sometimes I talk with parents that have not prioritized their faith and their consistency in gathering on Sunday. And they wonder why their kid, who's in high school now, doesn't value the gathering of believers, being in church, growing in their faith. And they say, Pastor, I want them to be better and I want them to grow. I want them to be at another place. But what they've seen is the example, and you say, well, I care about it. And they've heard your voice, and they've looked at your time. And they say, I hear what you say, Mom, but I don't see it in your life. And if you really cared, you would make time and be there. One of the most important things that you can do for your children as you're raising them in the faith is make sure your priorities are straight. Don't play around. Sometimes, step on toes. We say, well, our kids are in so many sports, and your kids are in sports to the point that they miss, and you choose that over your faith journey, your walk, being here on Sunday, growing in your faith groups, all of that. And you say, I just don't know why they're just not on fire. And I say, because they were raised in a home that had the priorities out of whack. And they thought the Bears game was more important to go to than worshiping God. They thought that playing soccer was more important than worshiping God. And so they have a value system that's out of whack, and they say, well, I'm just doing what I saw. And so I think it's our responsibility. Don't get all the priorities right. Get the priority right. Seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. Jesus says to Mary, there is but one thing. He says, hey, it's not about getting the thing 1 to 5 right. He says there's one thing that needs to be right to line everything else up. And it's your walk and relationship with God Almighty himself. That is the priority that usurps and covers any other opportunity in life. Now, that may mean you need to shift around your schedule or do this. But if you're trying to raise a family, you're going to be like Joshua. For me and my household, my son's not even in sports yet, but I'll tell you what, for me and my household, I can't direct his spiritual walk. He needs to encounter Jesus for himself. But you better believe I'm praying for that little boy, and I'm going to do everything possible to line it up so that he can encounter Jesus at any corner that he has. So I'm going to show him my example. It's not going to be a perfect example, but I'm trying to set it for him so that he would encounter he who is life. And see, my mom and dad weren't perfect, but they prioritized. God was number one in their life. He was number one. So as you evaluate, you look at it. Are you in one way or another saying to God, by the choices that you're making and where you're putting your time, God, you're not as important as this. If it's my anniversary and I choose to have a game night with the boys, my wife will not be happy because I just told her, this is more important than you. So put your time where it matters first. Make your priority right. And last but not least, follow the pattern. Listen to verse 16. The Israelites are to observe the Sabbath, celebrating it for generations to come as a lasting covenant. It will be a sign between me and the Israelites forever. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth. And on the seventh day he rested and was refreshed. When the Lord finished speaking to Moses on Mount Sinai, he gave him the 2 tablets. These were the 10 Commandments, 2 copies of it, of the covenant law, the tablets of stone inscribed by the finger of God. Now, when I speak this passage, there may be some in the room who say, hey, I thought the Sabbath, we don't have to do the Sabbath. I thought, Jesus came to didn't come to abolish the law, but fulfill the law. I thought, we don't really have to follow all of those laws in the Old Testament. So help me understand, Pastor, what do we have to do and not have to do? Well, here's what I'd say. Jesus has come and fulfilled the law. Jesus has come and fulfilled the law in a perfect way so that his sacrifice on the cross is enough to wash away our sins and quench the wrath of Almighty God so that we can be new creations and have new life. And there is a healthy pattern that God has established, not just in the 10 Commandments, which we haven't done away with any of the 10 Commandments. It's not like I can follow Jesus and murder now. It's like, no, we follow the 10, right? We don't follow the 10. I want to be super clear. We do not follow the 10 Commandments to earn our righteousness. I'm already right with God because I trusted in what Jesus did on the cross. I don't obey God so I can be right with God. I'm right with God so I obey God. This is the order of our faith. This is important. But God doesn't point to the creation of the Sabbath simply in Exodus 5 times. He says, do you remember how I worked in Genesis? He said, for 6 days I made the heaven and earth, and on the 7th day he rested and was refreshed. Does God, an infinite being, get tired? Of course not. God always has energy. God never runs out. He's always enough. He never gets tired. So why did God rest then? To, as a parent, show us an example that we would need to follow of a healthy way to live our life. God showed us an example, just like when Jesus was baptized, he was showing us an example. God's saying, you learn best when you see me do it first. So let me work 6. Well, God, I'm really busy. I have a lot. You don't really know my schedule. God's like, I created the heavens and earth, fam. Like, what are you doing? All heaven and earth, 6 days, I got it done. Like, it doesn't compare, and I still rested. And so in our faith, we're saying, God, we're gonna work as hard as we can, and we're gonna choose one day and say, God, we're gonna stop resting, we're gonna stop working, we're gonna rest and be refreshed, and we're gonna follow the pattern that we see all the way back before the law was given, all the way back in the creation order. My heart in this message is that you would leave and say, this is some pattern that I can apply to my life, live out so that you can live your best days yet. That you would feel refilled and full and feel like, I didn't know that God created this thing that we can follow it. And if I don't, let me say this too. I blow it with the Sabbath sometimes. I mean, I have it locked in my calendar. I don't take meetings. I don't do anything on Saturday. But can I tell you this? There's times where I don't practice it right. I'm working half the day, or I get something done, or I'm answering this. And so I've really had to guard. I had to put DND on my phone, do not disturb, and block emails and say, don't contact me, and this and that. And so I'm intentional to guard that time. But I don't always practice it. Sometimes I fall short and I miss a week. Can I tell you, it's not sin. I didn't fall short. I didn't sin against an almighty God. But I get back on the next week and say, God, I want to practice this because the pattern is going to produce healthiness in my life, in every area of my life. If you practice the Sabbath, I believe your life will be completely different. I believe you will have that fill. You will be stronger in your faith and your knowledge of the Lord. But let me say this. Colossians 2:16 says this. Let no one pass judgment on you in the questions of food and drink or with regard to the festival or a new moon or a Sabbath. These are a shadow of the things to come, but the substance belongs to Christ. What is being said in Colossians? That just like the tabernacle in the Old Testament, just like all of these different pictures, the blood on the doorpost that we talked about, all of these things were foreshadows pointing us to what we'd have in Jesus Christ. This rest of taking one day off every single day, every single week to focus on God, that rest that we'd have to keep going back to is a picture of saying, God saying, you see how you need that rest? There's another type of rest that you need as well, but it's a spiritual rest as well. And you only find it in Jesus. You can take these principles and apply them and reap some benefit from them, but if you don't know Jesus, you will never have the full rest that you're looking for. And Jesus says it this way himself. Matthew chapter 11, 28, Jesus says to people that do not know him, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. There is a rest for our souls that we cannot find only in Sabbath. There's a rest for our souls that we only find in a Savior who says, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you the rest that you're looking for. Because you will never find it in money. You will never find it in sex. You will never find it in success. You can only find it in me, your Savior. Come, all you who are weary and burdened. And these were people that were trying to do all the right things. Their heart was trying to be in the right place. They were doing all these good religious things, but there was this burden of, I'm never gonna do enough good. I'm never gonna do enough right. And God is saying, you, come to me. Because all of that is exhausting to try to make yourself right with a holy and righteous God. But you can put your faith in me, and I will give you what you could never earn. I will give you the rest that I designed you to have. I will give you what you've been searching for. You can only find that rest in the Savior Jesus, to know that my sins have been washed and that I stand righteous before a holy, all-consuming God, that Jesus Christ has made me right, and that I'm a son of Almighty God, that I could never earn it, nor do I need to earn it because Jesus has paid the price. I'll tell you what, I don't have this weight on my mind of what's gonna happen after I die. I have rest. My soul, when I sin, is not all in arms saying, if you just do more good, Josiah, just go to the pantry, get more money. No. My soul, even when I sin, even though the Spirit's grieved, I repent and my soul's at rest because I know I didn't earn it. I received it in grace through faith. And so I have a rest that you only experience from a God that sent his Son into the world to make a way for us so that we can live the better way.